Welcome back to the Old Barn on Ann Street. This is the Thursday edition of Bathroom in the Barn Week. And for today's episode, we're upstairs in the loft. And this week, we've been showing you everyday clips of the work that we have done in transforming the old feed stalls in the barn into a bathroom or a washroom. And every day we're making a little bit of progress, but also every day we're showing you a clip of the history that's written on the walls of this barn and the way that this barn is connected to the history of Shelburne. And the reason why we're up here in the loft today is because I'd like to flip the script, and I'd like to start today's episode by talking about the history, because I want to talk about a connection that this barn has to a significant part of Shelburne history. Let me show you what I'm talking about. If you take a look up into the rafters of the loft, you'll see something that's really, I think, quite significant. It's an old church pew. It looks like just a board that's stuck up there in the rafters, but you can see that there are legs on the pew that stick up in the air, and that up there high in the rafters is an old church pew. So why in the world do I show you this pew that's way up there in the rafters, other than the fact that it's kind of a cool thing? Well, we have to get into a little bit of the history of the area here for me to answer that question. And in fact, if you go back to the third episode of the Old Barn on Ann Street, I think it was around June 23rd or 24th, you can click on this link and you can go back and watch that episode if you'd like. We talked about the old history of all the Loyalists who came up to Shelburne in 1783. And the town went from a few hundred people to almost 18,000 people, literally overnight, within just a few months' time, or less than a year. And among those Loyalists were what were known as Black Loyalists. And the Black Loyalists were a fascinating part of history, because during the war, the British Army and the American Revolutionary War, the British Army promised any enslaved black enslaved people in the southern states who would escape and fight for the British, that in return the British would give them their freedom and land and opportunity at the end of the war. And so the Black Loyalists, this is where they were brought with the rest of the Loyalists at the end of the war. So shiploads of Black Loyalists were brought here to Shelburne, and they established the town Birchtown right outside of Shelburne. And of course, the reality of it is many of the promises that were made were not fulfilled. They didn't get what was promised them, and some of them never got what was promised until 1792, when they got on ships again and went to Sierra Leone to find land and property and freedom there as well. But here, while they were in Shelburne, they had faced a lot of hardships, but there were some significant members of the community that made a huge difference. And one of them was a man named David George. David George was a slave in South Carolina, and he escaped and fought for the British, but he also started the first black congregation in North America in Silver Bluff, South Carolina, as a slave. He taught himself to read and write so he could lead a small congregation of ex-slaves as what is thought to be the first black congregation in North America. Well, he was among the Black Loyalists who came here to Shelburne. And when he got here, he started another church here. And then he traveled around New Brunswick and Nova Scotia and started a number of other churches as well. But it was not an easy process for him, because he faced a lot of persecution. He was in the center of what was the first race riot here in town, which is another long story for another day. But what I want to tell you about is that he wrote his own story. He was one of the few Black Loyalists who wrote his own thoughts and his own record of his own life. And you can read what he had to say. And when he writes about a difficult time when he couldn't even afford to feed his family, there was someone named William Taylor and his wife named Anne, one of the few people that he mentions in his writing, who showed up at his house and who gave him food and money so that he could buy some potatoes to feed his family and then to grow more potatoes. And he specifically talks about how the William and Ann Taylor, the family, made a difference so that he and his family would not have been able to survive otherwise. Well, William Taylor is the man who owned this property. and his wife Ann owned this property. William Taylor became a member of David George's congregation. He was a white man from London and ended up owning a lot of property here in Shelburne, but he became one of the deacons in David George's church. He became one of the financial benefactors of David George's church. He became a caretaker, and he became an advocate, a racial justice advocate long before the civil rights movement or anything that we have in modern day times. The reason why I tell you that is this property was owned by William Taylor. Now, that pew up in the rafters was not used by David George. We know that because there was a fire in the barn and they rebuilt the roof in the 1800s. So that roof wasn't even there when David George was here. But every time I see that pew up in the rafters, I'm reminded of people like William and Ann Taylor, who were supporters of the Black Loyalists and supporters of the Black community, and how important that is. And so when I see that pew up in the rafters, I'm going to leave it there just as a reminder of the ways that we can support the important times, we can learn from the important times of Black history, and we can support the Black community in every way we can. And it's an important reminder, and I love that it's there. And it's Shelburne, it's this barn's connection to an important part of Shelburne history. But now let's get back to the Bathroom in the Barn week and see what work we have for today. Man, the washroom is really looking good. It's starting to come together. One more day before we finish all the work. So here's a clip from tomorrow's episode. You'll have to come back tomorrow to see what we do with all those newspapers on the last edition, the Friday edition of Bathroom in the Barn Week. But I also want to remind you one more time that this Sunday is the Christmas in the Barn pop-up market, November 24th. It's a second annual market. Hey, you know what? People from out of town have been reserving rooms in town just so they could come in for this market. The vendors are doing their last-minute preparations. The final preparations are being done in the barn. You can see some of the decorations behind me. Hey, you won't want to miss it. It's going to be a great time. So I hope to see you on Sunday at Christmas in the Barn. And in the meantime, don't forget to click on the portrait of the barn to become one of our subscribers. We would love to have you as one of our subscribers in our subscriber family. So I hope you come back tomorrow for the last edition of Bathroom in the Barn Week, and we'll see you then on the Old Barn on Ann Street.